It's time to accelerate. Hi, I'm your host, Andy Paul. Join me as I host conversations with the leading experts in sales, marketing, sales automation, sales process, leadership, management, training, coaching, any resource that I believe to help you accelerate the growth of your sales, your business, and most importantly, you. Hello, and welcome to Accelerate. Joining me again on the show is Connor Lee. Connor Lee is CEO of HipLead, based in San Francisco. Connor, how are you doing?
Doing great, Andy. Thanks a lot for having me on.
Well, hey, my pleasure. Always a pleasure to run into. I always seem to do at conferences and so on. So, for people that didn't listen, hard to believe, that might not have listened to the first episode we had together, the first interview back in February, I think, of 2016. May take a second. Introduce yourself again. Tell us a little bit about HipLead.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm founder, CEO of HipLead. We help companies, B2B sales and marketing teams scale their outbound sales. And we do that through providing very, very high quality targeted lists of contacts for them. And we also have a consulting arm that helps organizations run high performing outbound email campaigns. And we also have a new tool that allows people to build these very targeted self-serve lists on their own. So just doing it from a self-serve basis. So we're recently released that and pretty excited about it.
Okay, well, very cool. So you actually you'll run the email campaigns for people, though, or at least you used to, right?
Yeah, exactly. So we'll continue to build people, bespoke lists that are, of criteria for them that are, difficult to find, and that are very, very, very tight, matching, whatever their business goals are. We will also separately run outbound email campaigns for those lists, but we've given people an option which is has a lower minimum commitment, lower price, and it has some self-serve features that our clients have been asking for a while that allow them to build their own groups of lists. And then for all of those things, we can apply our expertise, having worked with a lot of sort of top SaaS companies on what works and helping them to scale their own outbound sales email campaigns. Got
it. So people can write their own copy if they want, but you could apply your expertise if they want to.
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we're going to talk today about an article you'd written and sort of take the conversation off that, which was, you said every SaaS sales team must try email first cold calling. Now, first question is, why wouldn't they do that?
Well, I mean, that's a good point. I think at the end of the day, a lot of teams, will give their reps a list, and the reps will run through them. Oftentimes, whether SDRs or AEs, a lot of times just getting through a big list of calls or getting through a big list of emails, oftentimes it can be very efficient to, focus on one thing at a time. And I think, and that's, just managing the daily work is what, when people end up not doing email first cold calling, that's kind of, the process. The advent of, there's a lot of great tools out there, Outreach and a number of other ones that allow sales reps to connect together a cadence of different steps and kind of manage that. And so that has allowed people to make it a lot easier to do email first cold calling. So,
yeah, I mean, it seems just in a general sense that one of the hard things about just cold calling without emailing first is it is extremely cold. I mean, I'll go back to my early days in sales where, hate to say this, where email hadn't existed yet. But even then, we always tried to send something like a mail or a letter or something to warm up cold calls. Even when we were doing, outbeating a territory on the street, we'd always try to warm the lead up with something, so some expectation of what it is we might be talking about when we come.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's there's a lot of people out there that it's sales is hard. It's labor intensive. It's repetitive, and it's easy to fall into just back into unhealthy or less productive habits pretty easily.
Yeah, definitely,
So,
definitely.
yeah. So one of the, so we ran an experiment and basically, and started applying, once we saw the results of this experiment, we started applying it, to, on our own team, widely. And then also started, recommending that other of our clients try the same thing, and actually working with them on setting up campaigns that were email first cold calling.
Right. So you said in your article that based on your research, the email first calling strategy can increase prospect to meeting rates 2 to 3 times. Why do you think that's the case?
Well, I mean, there's two reasons. I mean, the simplest, the most obvious one is that you catch someone when they're, yeah. So the email first cold calling, the idea is that you get up, you have to have a method to understand, ideally, if an individual has opened an email, that you have sent them. So there's a sort of a technology component. It works without it, but it works best when you have that
Sure.
ability.
And you
And
and you talk about that later in the article, and we'll get to that.
Mhm. But it works best because generally because the contacts, are looking at your email, right? Then they know who you are. They've received some information out of the blue. It's not totally cold per se. And, they can probably, with if you've called them 3 minutes or less, it'll probably be in their, short-term and mid-term memory, kind of who you are and what you were talking about if they actually read the email. So yeah, so it ends up, they just are more aware of who you are. And then secondly, we found, basically you have a reason to open up the call. You say, "Hey, I sent you an email." So it's a behavior that and people are more willing to listen and to take your call simply because there was some context, that it came before the call.
Yeah, and I guess that's the point I was really driving at is the 2 to 3 times was comparing getting a person on the phone in both instances, either without the email or with the email. And I think that was the comparison, right? So once you've got somebody on the phone, if you didn't do the email first, then your conversion rate to a meeting was going to be substantially lower than if you had emailed them first and provided some context for the call. So basically what the email does then is sort of gets past that first, what I call sort of the cold open of a call, the first 7 to 9 seconds, whether you have a chance to grab somebody's attention.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. You hit it right in the head. Yeah, it definitely does that. And, it can, just having, trained, ourselves kind of just really focused on our own internal SDR work. It's funny how, how much of a learning curve it can be for young SDRs or new SDRs to really getting past that first hurdle. And depending on what where you're working, what market you're in, it can be pretty competitive for to get young folks on your team even, or getting folks that are more experienced in your team. So this is a nice strategy that works, and can help young SDRs get over that initial hurdle and that initial awkwardness, if they were just purely cold calling without any context.
Yeah, and I would say even it's not just relegated to young SDRs. I mean, even I listen to a lot of recorded calls and even experienced SDRs. That first 0 to 9 seconds, all it does is basically serve to put the buyer's defenses up, right? Even the good ones. I mean, I get the calls all the time. First thing happens, the walls go up because I know it's a sales call.
Mm-hmm.
So
It's true.
so I said, I think it almost doesn't matter how adept people are at it, is sent to my way of thinking, and again, based on my own experience, is sending that email first, whatever that contact point is first. Yeah, you then have some context. That open becomes less awkward and becomes like getting into the meat of the conversation much more quickly.
Definitely. Yeah, it absolutely does. And at least it also makes the caller, the sales rep just feel more comfortable themselves, I think, if you've got something to hold on to in that first call.
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it gives them a reason, right? Because everybody has especially the new ones, have some level of call reluctance. And yeah, I think the email first actually really tamps down the call reluctance fairly substantially because, yeah, people then feel like, yeah, I'm not cold calling, I'm following up on something I sent. And follow up just mentally, even though the impact from the buyer's perspective is the same, just that slight twist in orientation of purpose makes a huge difference in people's willingness to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It is funny, sort of, and it's you can tell when it's actually interesting listening to cold calls that I get that have been preceded by an email and not preceded by an email. And now that I'm kind of thinking about it, I'm fairly certain that all of the calls that I've taken personally myself have been preceded by an email. And maybe there was one, but that guy was just exceptionally good at cold calling and actually getting me on the phone. So,
And there are very few of those people.
absolutely. And if you find all of those people, hire them and keep them on your team.
Well, if they're that good, they're not going to stay SDRs for long. So yeah, yeah. So let's talk about the email component of it then. So what? Let's get some specifics on what that warm up email should look like. So best practices. What do you recommend? Because you send tons of these emails yourself. Your company is like a subject line. What's your best recommendation for people that are looking at putting together a pithy subject line that catches attention?
Sure. Well, there are two different approaches, and I'll go into the first one, which is probably the simplest. The simplest is really relevancy. I mean, at the end of the day, just like any outbound email campaign, the first within the half a second, the person wants to know, like, what, how is this relevant to me? And usually when we work with our clients, we always make sure the subject line includes some sort of relevancy to about them, or if not the first line of the actual email, using specifics about their industry, using specifics about them, or asking engaging questions that actually matter to them, right off the bat. And we like to be able to basically to sort of say that, look, this can pass a Turing test, more or less, right? Well, and when cold emails kind of
pass the what test?
A Turing test in a way, right? Well, it's a human, not a machine. A real person is sending you this email, not just a generic one-to-many email blast.
Okay, so for people who hadn't heard that term before, so reference, I presume, to Alan Turing.
Exactly.
Okay.
And who basically said that the pinnacle of computer development would be the point where a person interacting with a computer, I think over text, couldn't tell if it was a real person or a computer that they were actually interacting with.
Okay. Yeah, I presume it wasn't over text because he was dead long before text messaging came along. So, okay. So subject line, relevance. So keywords relevant to what they're doing.
Relevant to what they're doing, and depending on their audience, what they care about. So for us,
outcomes.
Yeah, exactly. Outcomes. And I'll use an example with our own organization, or any organization that sells to sales and marketing folks. Is what's relevant to them is their audience, not necessarily their industry as much. So it depends on the role of the individual you're trying to contact within the organization. So if you're selling to sales and marketing, it can often be about who they're trying to reach, and other roles have different things that are important to them that they care about. So you have to really, what we usually do is we create a matrix that effectively says, okay, well, let's look at the total audiences that you're selling to. And we create a matrix based on the industries of those audiences. And we have, why this industry should care about this thing. Usually try to create some content that's relevant to them, or put that in the email. And then the second piece we have is a contact role to company size matrix. So you can look at organizational size and role, and for each, depending on what they're reaching out to, how many different groups the email campaign is going to, we'll put together a matrix that talks about here is the pain points and that are addressed this type of role at this organizational size, and then we use that in the copy pretty early on.
Got it. Okay. And so one of the big issues, obviously, with a lot of email these days is, even though there's a lot of hype from a lot of tools saying, this is a tool that we can use to really personalize this mass email we're sending. How do you construct something that if you're sending in limited quantities still feels personalized, besides mail merge and hey, here's your first name? How do you do that? How do you overcome that sort of I've got a filter. I can sort of not 100% reliability, but 90% reliability know what's mass versus what is personal?
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, it takes a little bit of work. Working with when we're doing this, working with our clients, it's always a little bit of a back and forth to understand their product and how their product impacts their audience, and that's something you really can't get away with, not doing. You really have to understand, what are the different pain points that apply to each of these audiences. And it can be hard, and working, if you're at an early stage organization, it can be hard to nail those down. You basically have to spend, your sales cycle sort of doing that. But at later stage organizations, they tend to have a little better idea. And kind of getting back to kind of my layout of a matrix, what we do is we'll break down the audiences into pretty granular groups, our clients' audiences, and do and spend the time to make sure that pain point really hits that group of contacts. And now it's not going to resonate with absolutely everybody, but it's going to be relevant enough that they're going to care and respond at a predictable, dependable rate. Mm-hmm. It used to be 3, 4, 5 years ago, you'd send out blasts of emails and you would get a decent response rate, by being mysterious. Not giving them a lot of information that would, sparking a conversation. I think that period's more or less past, and now you really have to do the work to divide up the audiences and understand those audiences' pain points and test those pain points to see if that resonates.
Well, I think you raise a really key point and you talk about this in other articles you've written, is just the absolute necessity of A/B testing any emails that you send out.
Yeah, it's funny that, when people don't A/B test, they oftentimes, a lot of our clients will have run campaigns and once we really turn on the A/B testing and show them the progress, that they're really shocked at the results, that actually come through it. I mean, let's say, there's another article I'd written, one that you're probably referencing, when we looked at, tests that we had run and we took 4 different copies and we basically said, okay, if you ran this copy is the 4 copies you wrote and didn't A/B test them. If you ran them all together at once, the same number of emails for each one, or you just randomly chose each one, what would be the response rate? And just by running, 2 different comparisons between those copies, it increased it from a 2% interested to a 9% interested on those random subject lines. So it can make a huge, huge difference.
Yeah, and then there's a cumulative effect of doing that, right? So if you're continually doing A/B testing and branching toward the positive side, as opposed to if you're not doing it, you could be off on a path that there's no recovery from.
Totally. Absolutely. And also the simple fact with the people that are writing the emails, if they're cognizant enough about A/B testing, about the need to do that, they're going to learn things themselves, and they're going to understand things about their audience that maybe wasn't as apparent to them before A/B testing. So you take that, and that what you learn about your audience applies to everything you do going forward.
Well, raise an interesting point is, so if companies are going to invest in, being aggressive about emailing prior to cold calling and so on, to me, this is not a throwaway effort. It's not a matter of just saying, if we get that in front of the person, that's good enough. It needs to be good copy. As you talk about the points of relevance, needs to be succinct, needs to speak to their needs. And I think that's a problem I see a lot is, the quality of the email message you get is not very good. So do people just need to hire copywriters? I mean, if they really want to look at this from a cost effectiveness standpoint, we're going to spend a lot of money investing, build our SDR team, make a bunch of cold calls. We're going to proceed with good emails. But if the emails are crap, then they're sort of wasting the effort.
Yeah, I mean, hiring copywriters is definitely a good way to go. At least I'd say if you're using the same copy in your outbound email campaigns that you were using a year or a year and a half ago, you should probably change things up and shake things up a little bit, unless you're in a space that is not competitive at all and has a huge audience that hasn't heard of what you're doing.
Let's see, a huge audience, not competitive. Yeah, I don't think those exist.
Yeah, but we try to do ourselves internally, and for our own campaigns is at least once a quarter, kind of try to rewrite the playbook and test that against the old playbook. And use things that are going on. So we're constantly evolving. For our clients, we're doing it every week, every other week. We're testing, making either minor or sometimes pretty large shifts, depending on what our clients are looking for. But yeah, I mean, it's like any kind of marketing collateral. It gets stale. The tips and tricks that worked 1 year ago are decrease. There's a certain half-life to everything when it comes to sales and marketing. At least from a tactical perspective.
Well, certainly marketing, way more so than sales. But yeah, it's true. Though interestingly, you ask people what some of their favorite sales books are that have been most influential, successful people in sales these days, and they'll still reference books like Dale Carnegie that was written, How to Win Friends and Influence People, was written in the 1930s. So certain things about human nature don't change, but.
True.
What sort of segue? I was going to give you a little bit of a hard time about something you said in the article.
Yeah.
Which was, you said 20 years ago selling was simple. No, what exactly did you mean by that?
Okay, I understand kind of where the bone picking is going on this, but
maybe you don't. But let's go.
Well, okay, so I guess what I was saying, and the point I was trying to get to is that there's a lot of stuff right now being thrown at salespeople. There's a lot of tools. There's a lot of channels. There's in-person
communication channels, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and it can be a lot to balance. Sales is about prioritization. Being successful at sales is really a key skill is being able to prioritize, and not fall up on things that are lower priority than other things are higher priority. And when you just add more channels and you add more things, getting the fundamentals done can often be overlooked. Doing the fundamentals well can be overlooked, and because it's easy to you have to learn each one of these different tools. You have to become proficient at it, and then you have to look for trends across all of them. And I think, that's I guess what I was getting to. It was maybe not simpler, but there were probably less distractions.
Yeah, I would say that's the case for sure, right? I mean, yeah, fewer distractions. 20 years ago, people weren't walking around with iPhones in their pockets, or even BlackBerries necessarily, for that matter. I mean, they were just beginning to come out. Yeah, no, it's just sort of funny. I'd had a conversation with another guest recently. We've been talking about this, and the sort of same topic came up about, people somehow imagine that, in the olden days things were that much easier. Da, 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 da. And I was harkening back to my days, and my first, when I first sold, and when I first was managing a team of salespeople in the East Bay area of the Bay Area. And, I had salespeople that were held up at gunpoint. I had people taking shots at their car. I mean, things that don't happen when you're in inside sales. So,
that's true.
And there were actually physical gatekeepers. So that's the thing that's really sort of interesting. I think that, nice thing about inside sales to a certain degree, rejection's never easy, but it's way different when you're actually meeting and face to face with a person that's just telling you, get out of here.
Totally.
And how do you get around that? Because that was your job. So if we were out making, cold calling 50 calls a day, knocking on doors, it was different. I wouldn't say it was easier or harder, but it was just different. But I had to give you a hard time about that.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
And rightly so.
But also I think that to a certain degree, it sort of begs sort of the conversation is, without going too far down a path, but as of digression, is that, that's something we're going to have to separate selling from prospecting. Because really what we're talking about today is prospecting.
Mm-hmm.
And in my mind, it's an open argument whether you really consider that selling. Yeah, we tend to put that role into a sales function, but it's lead generation. It could just as easily be in marketing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a very good point. It's sort of funny how, obviously, and there's a whole discussion of marketing and sales sort of merging, and where the one starts and one ends. Um, but yeah, I mean, that is a good point. I tend to think that the point at which marketing ends and sales starts, or really where prospecting starts and prospecting ends and sales starts, is really, I guess most people would say it's the conversion to the opportunity, but that's just a tag. That's just something you apply to it. But at some point, it's, has their interest been sparked to some degree? I think still needs to be in the realm of prospecting. I think checking boxes without, really demonstrating interest is I think, and that's why I consider prospecting in sales, because I think that when prospecting is done correctly, you are sparking their interest, not only qualifying them, but moving them to that next point. So I guess that's kind of where I come from on that angle, at least on that piece.
Yeah, I mean, I tend to come down where it's, terminology changes, but when you have a sales qualified lead,
Mm-hmm.
then sales starts.
Mm-hmm.
That first substantive conversation, that's sales. Prior to that, it's to me, it's sort of awareness building and interest generation, lead generation. But it doesn't really matter in the long term. But just a little side conversation there. All right, so let's talk about some of the tactics. Back to emailing first.
Sure.
Is you talked about doing email blasts, and what I thought was really interesting is, because again, there's a fair amount of divergence of opinion about this. Is you advocate, look, if you get any replies from these outbound emails, you treat them like inbound leads, and you call them as quickly as you can. You said 5 minutes, which would be ideally be fantastic. Huge believer in that. But on the other hand, I talked to a company just a couple days ago, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, we have way too many leads to be able to do that." And replies to campaigns and so on. So,
Mm-hmm.
where do you sort of I know you come down doing it faster. What if people say, "Well, we just get too many replies from this. We can't do it all that quickly"?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, I guess I come from a perspective where, again, a lot of our clients are selling, relative, like ACV products of, over 5, almost always over 10, definitely over 5, and oftentimes over 10,000. Not 500,000 usually as much, but over 10,000.
10,000
for sure.
As a monthly recurring number?
Oh, just average contract value.
Okay.
So,
ACV.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And
so it's very transactional.
Yeah. Well, yeah, relatively transactional. I mean, yeah. But at a certain point, like, I guess on our campaigns that we run for people, we measure interested rates. It's one of the things that we do for our clients. So we actually go in and tag, whether an email is interested, neutral, not interested, or like take me off your list, and a no reply. And so we tend to prioritize calling to the interested, and we will prioritize calling to the interested and the neutrals before the not interested.
And interested indicated by opening an email, or opening and replying.
Yeah, replying ideally first, and then actually opening. But so I guess you have to pick and choose your battles. So it depends on how big a list you're emailing, how many of them are opening them in general, how targeted. I suppose the email first calling works when you have a very targeted list to begin with.
Yeah,
and that you're it's
you've done the work to identify the personas, the stakeholders, the people you need to reach out to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and you also then say, hey, call everybody that replies. Which I think is, to me, I agree 100%. But again, you'll find some number of people that say horrified by that prospect because, they're no way qualified, blah, 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 blah.
True. And I guess that comes back to also that we try to data qualify as much as we can. And if we can't data qualify them, we try as much as we can to their response qualifies them. So asking a question that in that response, it will make sure they're qualified or not. And if they're not qualified, obviously wouldn't call them back, wouldn't give them a call.
Well, the thing is, you'd use every reply, every you had in all caps. So even if somebody calls and says we're not interested, call them.
If they're qualified, if they're a qualified lead, I think it would be. I mean, it depends on their level of interest. So if they're saying, don't call me, remove me from your list.
Yeah, obviously, right.
But yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we've done it one as not only as an exercise for our SDRs to sort of just have more conversations with people, but I think that most of the time you're not going to get a hold of them anyways, right? So as you know, in cold calling in general, right?
Yeah,
It's
3/4 go to email, right?
Connect rate. Yeah. Right. So
or voicemail. I said email, but voicemail. Yeah. Go to voicemail, yeah.
So we haven't found that it's been that. Not much negative has come out of calling the not interested. We haven't gotten a lot of people that are angry. We have gotten a number of people to convert. And the reason why is because people instinctively say not interested without reading an email. Oftentimes there's a lot of people that fall into that category. And when you're following up when the sales team is following up with leads that are, that have responded as a little bit negative, or not interested, we usually like to understand why they weren't interested. And that's usually the way that we've trained our team and our clients oftentimes do. So you give them a call and say, hey, totally understand. Don't want to hear from me. I'm just curious, what was the reason why? And just so I can make sure we don't bother you again if it's not relevant for you.
Yeah, that's a good tactic. So last one tactic you talked about, sort of the advanced, which is, obviously you're using email tracker and you call everybody who opens.
Yeah. And again, this is one that's really should be used only when the list is
very targeted.
Very targeted. Yeah. Right. Or else you just, it's not a great use of your team's time. But yeah, and we try to call within like 30 seconds. And so what you need to do of them opening now, and what needs to happen is you have to slow the email cadence out. So you're not sending, 1,000 emails at once. You just send one every couple of minutes first. And it needs to not be a huge list that you're blasting out,
right.
Maybe 50 every morning or, through
right.
over a bit of time. And obviously you're not going to call every single person that opens it within 30 seconds or 5 minutes. But you can use that as you do know when they open it, especially if the system you're using, like some of the tech that we have, tells you what type of device they're on, and it tells you the number of times they've opened it.
Right.
And so at that point, it's that they're looking at your email that you sent them. Maybe they've shared it with someone else, that they're on their mobile phone or on their computer, and you can use that to really inform your conversation. Now, my thought on that, and this is, I sort of do it on emails that I send out is I do it on the second open, because then I know they're going back, they're looking at it again, and then it really sort of freaks the customer out because they're saying, I was just thinking about you. And it's like, oh, really? Well, great minds think alike. I mean, this is, and even people you think would know better and know that you're tracking when they open or not, they still have that same reaction. So I think it's I think doing it on the second open, a very strong way to go. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And obviously, if all these recommendations at the end of the day, don't change your, if there's limitations of your sales process, we're not advocating people that change their sales process around completely. But it's worth trying. It's worth trying to see if this works for you.
All right.
Yeah.
So kind of last segment of the show, I got some standard questions I ask all my guests. You've answered some of these before, so I've got some new ones for you. So first one is in your opinion, is it easier to teach a technical non-salesperson how to sell, or teach a salesperson how to sell a technical product?
I'd say the latter. And it depends, of course, on the complexity of your product. And I think that's a really big, a major component is actually how technical. So if you're selling to, to people with PhDs and, in fields where it requires 10 years of specialization to get where they are, it highly, highly specialized, then it's going to be a little bit of a learning process. I think that for most sales positions are not that, even on the technical side of things, are not that technical. I think I would tend to try to get smart utility salespeople that can, be given the cliff notes on this specific target and go with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So, what's one great work of literature that you think every salesperson should read?
Man, every salesperson should read. Well, I'll answer this with I'd say every sales manager or founder that's in a CEO founding role should definitely read one of my favorite recent books was Ben Horowitz's book, The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I thought it was an awesome book. I may have actually given you that book last time as well. But I think that's just an amazing book in terms of how to think about selling, how to think about your organization, even if it's not about selling. There's a lot of things that he talks about in that book that are really applicable to setting up an organization for success. And obviously he's a SaaS oriented guy. So there's always major sales components in what he's done and what he continues to do.
Okay. Well, I need to learn how to ask that question better because I said the great literary book, and that wouldn't necessarily qualify as a literary book, but that's okay. We'll move on.
Interesting.
So if you could change one thing about your business self, what would it be?
One thing about my business self. Well, I would. I think I'd make more of me, obviously, but. I think one thing that I could probably do was to spend more time, doing things that are less work related. So I think obviously reading more would be one of those things.
Reading great works of literature, for instance.
Great works of literature, for example.
All right, perfect. There you go. Excellent. All right, last question for you. Do you have like a favorite quote or words of wisdom that you live by? And if so, what is it?
Well, let's think here. So I've got. There is a quote, and I usually keep it on my desk. I don't see it right in front of me. Oh, here it is. And it's a poet. This guy, Rainier Maria Rilke.
Yes.
And he has a quote: "All that is hurrying soon will be over with. Only what lasts can bring us to the truth." So I like that quote a lot.
All right. So say it again more slowly.
Only that is hurrying will soon be over with. Only what lasts can bring us to the truth.
Oh, like it. All right. Very nice. Well, good, Connor. I appreciate it. A good way to end the interview. So tell people how they can get in contact with you.
Sure. You can go to HipLead.com. That's probably the easiest. And either request a sample or email us there. We also have our phone number on the site as well. But visit us at HipLead.com.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you again. And remember, friends, thank you for spending time with me today. Make it a part of your day every day to deliberately learn something new to help you accelerate your success. And one easy way to do that, take a minute, subscribe to this podcast to accelerate. That way you won't miss any of my conversations with top business experts like my guest today, Connor Lee, who shared his expertise about how to accelerate the growth of your business. So thanks for joining me. And until next time, this is Andy Paul. Good selling, everyone. Thanks for listening to the show. If you like what you heard and want to make sure you don't miss any upcoming episodes, please subscribe to this podcast on iTunes or Stitcher.com. For more information about today's guest, visit my website at andypaul.com.